Welcome to this Speaker's Corner meeting of the Republican Labour Education Forum. These meetings are they're ad hoc, if you like. They're a hot topic of the day, and this meeting has been called in response to the revelations that were put out on the Channel 4 program on the royal finances. It was Channel 4. It was a combination of dispatches and, of course, the Sunday Times. So this meeting is in response to those revelations that we've been treated to. So hopefully we've got two speakers today. Steve Freeman is going to introduce the topic, and then Phil Vellender is going to give us a bit more detail about the royal finances. So I'm going straight to Steve.
Thank you, Carol. I noticed as I was looking to this that in 2015 there was a petition registered in Parliament calling for the Queen to pay off the UK's national debt by selling off some of the Crown's assets. Now, I don't even pay off the national debt by selling off some of the Crown's assets, but this petition managed to garner 15 signatures. I mean, normally you have to have about 10,000 to force it onto the agenda. So, of course, it didn't take off, and it's significant in a way about, and maybe we want to talk a little bit about that Parliament wasn't interested. I would say that neither myself nor Phil are experts in royal finances. I doubt if. I'm sure you comrades probably know as much as we do. We only decided to look at this yesterday. And it may be a future topic that we might look at in greater detail. And I'm referencing the article by Richard Palmer in The Guardian on the 2nd of November, and of course the Dispatches programme I also watched. Our concern, therefore, is not with the details of that, but more to do with the politics and the questions that this scandal reveals and was revealed in the Channel 4 Dispatches programme. I thought of 4 questions, not the one I think Richard threw up. Why did they do it now? I didn't include that in my list of questions, but I did have, why is there no accountability for this scandal? Why is secrecy? My second question, why? And these are questions to you, comrades, really, because I'd be interested to know what comrades think about this. Why is secrecy so important? My third one was, why is there no Republican movement? Or is there a Republican movement? I mean, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. We could discuss that. And another one, which we've spoken about, is why is there no Republican Party in England? I mean, there's one in Northern Ireland. Why isn't there one in England? Now, I've seen James O'Brien say, well, basically we have a kind of lazy republicanism in England because it's a large number of people, maybe 25% of people claim to be Republicans in some form or other. Yet it's never turned into a political thing. James O'Brien called it lazy republicanism, meaning we can't be asked. Why bother? Why bother doing anything about it? So I think those are questions that kind of spring into my mind. I saw a report recently of the King and Queen of Spain being pelted by angry residents in Valencia with mud and stones. I think murder, mud, mired monarchy, I think would be a great Sun sort of headline. Murder, mired monarchy. I can't see this would happen here, I was thinking to myself. Why would it happen there? And I think when I was thinking about this, well, in a way, the monarchy was reintroduced by Franco to keep a republic at bay. So history and culture is not the same in Spain because of that experience in the 1930s as it is here. We've been going back for a much longer time. So I think there's history and culture. And I was thinking to myself, perhaps the King of Spain is seen as the head of state, responsible for these disasters and failures of the state. I don't think anybody here thinks the king really is the head of state or would be responsible for any of the disasters that we've had, and we've had plenty of them, like the post office scandal, like bread products, like Grenfell, like Hillsborough. Nobody would think the king should have anything to say in that. They do the plaudits. They don't really do responsibility. So last week we had a forum on the manifesto that we put forward we published it in July 2024 for a Commonwealth of England, and we had 2 points in that, and they don't often appear. But I'm just going to reference it because they don't often appear in the manifestos of most of the left. One of those important points is public ownership of land, and that goes to the heart of what's going on here. All the land in England, it says, currently owned by the Crown, is the property of the Commonwealth, the sovereign people of England. All rents from land will be used for public purposes. The use and distribution of land should be under the democratic control of local and regional citizens' assemblies subject to the laws of Parliament, and so on and so forth. So public ownership of the land is something we've made very important in our politics. And then, of course, we also had a little bit where we say the Commonwealth will abolish all social distinctions and privileges of rank, and hence all titles such as King, Prince, Duke, Earl, Lord, and all orders of knights, members of the British Empire, honourable and right honourable titles. Every citizen, it says there, every citizen will have the same status under the laws of the Commonwealth. Now, the left doesn't tend to campaign typically on these questions. But anyway, I think if we have to trace this story back, the story begins, I think, in 1066 with the Norman conquest and the oath given by one of the most violent, psychopathic, genocidal monarchs we've ever had, William I, or William the Bastard. And it's from that point of taking over the land that you get the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall, which are central to this story, going right the way back to later on to the 13th century. Now, interestingly enough, I'd forgotten they were abolished in 1649 by the said Commonwealth, and they were restored again after 1660. But they were put together in a slightly odd sort of way. But they were abolished and restored. So they've been abolished once before, and they have been restored. But I want to make the key point, which is relevant. I think the key in this story, is the 17th century. This 17th century that redefined the relationship between the monarchy and Parliament and people. Some of the power passed from the monarch to the Parliament. But I think another important part of this is what I would say was the bifurcation of the feudal monarchy into monarch and the crown being the state, the crown corporation, something which has developed over the next 100 years. So the monarchy and the monarch and the crown in feudal times were the same. As a result of this revolution, they become different. Sometimes you can't think the monarch is the crown and the crown is the monarch. It's really quite confusing. Are we talking about the king, or are we talking about the crown as an institution? Remember that the monarch owns Balmoral and Sandringham, but the crown owns Buckingham Palace. So we've always been talking in the Republican Labour Education Forum about the idea of the crown being, or the crown state being, a corporate body, not about individual monarchs, but an institution, more like the East India Company, almost like a multinational corporation operating across the globe. Its headquarters are in Whitehall, and the chief executive of this Crown Corporation operates from Downing Street, and it employs about 4 million people. Okay, that's a big organization, a big and powerful organization. Then we have this second corporation that could be called, I invented a name for it, Royal Family Limited, a private limited company, or what the Duke of Edinburgh used to call the firm. You may remember that. This is headquarters, I think it's probably headquartered at Balmoral Castle, and it employs about, well, I thought it was 1,000 people. Phil told me it was 700, so maybe it's 700. It doesn't matter. Press secretaries, cooks, servants, drivers, footmen, all sorts of royal advisors, etc. And these two bodies, if we think of them distinctly, the Crown as the state and almost the private company, the Royal Family Limited, both of them are sort of Well, I suppose you could say they're separate and yet they go together. I remember an old, I don't know, an old embarrassing song from the 1950s, which reminds me. So here we're going to get. It was called "Love and Marriage." I don't even remember this song. Older comrades among you might do. Love and marriage, go together like a horse and carriage. It said. It's a sort of, and it concludes, you can't have one without the other. It said. So from that song, and it's a bit like that. The Royal Family Limited and the Crown are distinct. They go together, and you can't have one without the other. So if we could say we could abolish the if we could abolish the Royal Family Limited and redistribute those 700 people, 700 workers, you say, well, we could just carry on with the crown as it was without making any change, but we couldn't because they're so connected together. They would open up the whole question of how the state operates, how it works, which is why the two things have to defend each other. The crown has to defend the royal family, and the royal family is there to protect the crown, because behind the crown is the City of London and finance and banking, because that was really the impact of that glorious revolution in the 17th century. So what we have done as a Republican Labour Education Forum, we have tended to talk about the crown and the power of the state. If you go to the Republic, the official organisation of Republicans in England, Scotland and Wales, they focused very much on the personality of Charles Windsor and the royal family. So we've been concentrating on different sides of this this issue. So today we are going to focus in the thing that we don't tend to focus on is the question of how the Royal Family Limited, how this private company is financed and how it makes its profits. So it seems it's making a lot of money from selling property to the Crown, you know, for schools, ambulances. That's all of that is reported out. I'm going to just put up, Carol, just to end on this point before passing you over to Phil. I did a little diagram, if I can do a little share on this, and my little diagram, if it works, will come up here. Royal Family Limited, the firm, and the first thing that I've got in there is I've got the Crown Estate Trust. All the profits go to His Majesty's Treasury from the Crown Estate Trust. A percentage of that is paid to the ASG. What is the ASG? The ASG is the annual sovereign grant, which pays for all the royal duties and the upkeep of the royal residences. All right. So the Crown Estate Trust is not, it is and it isn't really in the Queen's control, but all the profits from it go to there. And then in addition to that, we've also got these two other components. We've got also the sovereign grant reserve. There's a little reserve they've got of 45 million. If they get into debt, there's a reserve in their finances to pay those debts. They've spent more than they can get. They can dip into this 45 million pound reserve. Then we've got the Duchy of Lancaster, which gives money to the king. These are the private sources of money for the king. And it says the Duck. There, I missed the Y off that. The Duchy of Cornwall gives the funds to the Prince of Wales. And the last little point on here, we have the cost of security. Apparently, we're paying, the Met Police cover the cost of security for the monarchy, and that's about an estimate about £100 million a year is going to pay for the security of the monarchy. So I'm just putting that up just as we've got these different elements. We've got the Crown Estate Trust, we've got the annual sovereign grant, and they've got their reserve, and then we've got the monies from the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall. Not forgetting how much money is paid, how we have to pay the Metropolitan Police to £100 million to protect them. Now, I'm going to stop at this point because Phil's going to come in and we're going to talk a little bit more I think, about where we are, but more the politics, Phil, is what we're going to talk about rather than all the details of the finances. Obviously, I've been looking forward to hear what comrades have got to say, and I hope we can develop some of these things more in discussion.
Showing that I was highlighting my royalty, as I represent the royal family in my speech, because they're obviously being pilloried here tonight, and I'm very disappointed with our lack of loyalty to the crown. I'm joking. Okay, so what I feel very strongly about all this is that it ties in with so many elements of this toy town nurse, what I call the nanny state, very literal nanny state, because we are essentially deferential to a chimera, to an illusion, to a complete fake. It's just something that's only been sustained through pomp, circumstance, and secrecy. And I think my main interest in this is how it relates to other things we've been talking about here that Steve has alluded to. And those are things like the blood scandal. But I'd go back even further than that. I'd go back to the Kenya Mau Mau torture hearings. I don't know how many of you know about the Kenya uprising in detail, but just to let you know that it was Enoch Powell that actually blew the whistle on the torture camps in Kenya, ironically, as it later turns out. But he felt this was an outrage that was not worthy of our empire. And so he blew the whistle on it. And they were supposed to be given compensation. So there are two elements here. One is secrecy, and therefore they try and cover things up. And that's one of the functions of the crown. The other one is compensation never gets paid. They aim to see as many people dying off as possible. Now, this secrecy, one begins to understand a lot better if you look at that program that was on Channel 4, because the secrecy is absolutely fundamental to the survival of the royal family. Without secrecy, without the veil of that sort of strange, Shelley wrote a poem, Lift Not the Painted Veil, a different subject, but nonetheless, it's a good image, isn't it? They mustn't lift away the veil, because once they do, you see quite how outrageous, not just the money, that's the field of interest of Republic. The money, the personalities, the jollies, the wasted trips, all that stuff, that's Republic's business, because they're an anti-monarchist organization. As Republicans, we tend to be much more broad in our critique of the state, of the crown, because we see it more important to understand how our daily lives are essentially limited by the kind of political democracy, so-called, we live in. And this secrecy pervades British culture and British society and our so-called democracy. I do insert so-called because I believe fundamentally it is stagnant and putrid and putrescent and rotten, and it emanates from the settlement of 1688. And I know we've had Reform Acts, and I know we've had changes, and now I think black MPs are allowed in the lifts in the House of Commons. So there have been enormous advances. But that aside, those trivial, in my opinion, reforms don't cover the fundamental weakness of the fact that we do not have democratic control over our institutions, our government, our parliament, our whole crown structure of government. So this program is very much saying, and if you listen to what the gentleman said in it, and I 100% can agree with Republic and what it says in terms of its criticisms of the royal family, it's very valid, but it doesn't go far enough. And so we can find out that they've got all this money, all these lands, all these secret things they do, but what are we able to do about it? This is the question that was left unsolved from our civil war back in the 1640s. It was never resolved. When Charles II came back and when the Stuart dynasty was re-established, the questions that led to the civil war were reformulated. A new bourgeoisie took over the House of Commons. They created a kind of republic for a while. Oliver Cromwell became king in all but name. And there was such a thin support or understanding of the political importance of what had happened in the Civil War that the royal House of Stuart was able to be re-established. And if we run down the centuries, nothing that has been said about this royal family has really changed. They knew no more about it in the 1700s than they did in the 1800s, than they did in the 1900s. They've managed to sail on regardless because it's seen as normal. And what the British state managed to do was to create this illusion that all this was entirely normal. That we do it like this because we're British, we're a democracy, we're free people. And then they trot out Magna Carta and habeas corpus and all these things. So what is the real important thing we're learning at the moment by watching this program? Well, I believe that it's about creating a fundamental program of Republican reform, democratic Republican reform, which says we don't need a secret Privy Council which the king meets with every week. We don't need to swear allegiance to some monarch that's basically a big business person, because that's all they are. Let's be clear about it. What that program demonstrated was they're no more royal than fly. They're just as much into making money as anybody else is in British capitalism. The only thing about them is they double as a kind of holding together of the British state, which is why they get a sovereign grant, and also as a head of state, they double as that, but they also double as keeping the myth going. So lots of people, they do a good job, and they're worth every penny. Tourism would collapse without the royal family and all that stuff, which any slight analysis will tell you is nonsense. What was interesting about James O'Brien's show this morning, I've only had time because I've been busy all afternoon to listen to the first half hour or so, is he is in a liberal position, like so many people who are critics of the royal family, in that they are stunned by what was revealed. They're shocked. I mean, he was shocked. He said he didn't know the question he was going to ask his listeners to respond to. He really didn't know. And that's because, as Steve pointed out, we have no Republican tradition here. And I mean that explicit in terms of a party. There is no there's no party in this country that has a Republican strand in its manifesto. There's no party on the left that contains a Republican demand. They all consider it as large. I'm here talking about Socialist Workers' Party and that lot, certainly the Morning Star readers and all that. Yes, they say, well, after the revolution, blah, blah, blah. Yes, we're all Republicans. But Steve and I have tried to engage with the left on this, and we found it very difficult to get them to understand why the political economy, Marx and Engels, matters. Because that's the big thing that this is about. It's about the political economy. The left is economistic. The politics of the constitution, the fact we don't have a written constitution, we don't have proper democratic control of our parliament. Our parliament doesn't have any democratic control over the crown. The crown is the executive, but it's more than the executive in terms of ministers. It's that network of power that runs this country. It goes into the civil service, but it goes beyond that. Heads of big companies, they're part of the crown. The City of London, the Treasury, the Bank of England, that whole structure. We have no democratic control over that at all. Such is the thing that when poor old Rachel Reeves, who I have a great fondness for, because I think she's striving to do well, but just not very good at it, she comes into government without an idea of what to do. So and she makes this speech at the Treasury. One of the Treasury ministers stuffs a note in her hand, and it's basically a shopping list of cuts the Treasury wants. And at the top of the list was the £300 a year winter heating fuel allowance should go. And she just took it on because the Treasury knows better than you do. They defer to it. So the weakness of our democracy is the fact we are represented. We're not directly in control. We have to filter our politics through these MPs. Parliament doesn't directly control the Treasury or what it does. It tells ministers, who are generally on the back foot because they just don't know enough about what goes on in the secret part of the state, to be able to make intelligent decisions. And secretly, so they can come out and have this absurd budget. 5 days later, it emerges that their £300 fuel allowance cut, had the royal family, the firm, been paying its taxes, would be absolutely unnecessary. Now, the question is, why will it never change, or probably not? Well, I think it comes at a price change in this case, because so much of this country's mythology is based on the royal family, the pomp and circumstance. But I'll go further than that. I'll also say fundamental to it is the honours system, which binds people to it. I mean, David Olusoga's taken an OBE, but loads of other people have. It's very hard to criticise the slave trade if you've taken order of the British Empire, in my opinion, but there you go. But he's not the only one. There are plenty of others. Benjamin Zephaniah said no to the honour. So did David Bowie, by the way. But the honour system serves to make people feel wanted as part of it all, because otherwise you're kept at a distance and the door is never really allowed to open. So, just quickly then, I just want to run through a couple of things. They have got feudal levies come from lands that were stolen in 1066. But they also charge to cross rivers, to fish off the coast. Our wind farms. Now, Charles is a great promoter of the green politics, and I'm very proud to say that I agree with him. I'm a fundamental royal family Green Party person. I agree with everything they say on that, except that they charge for us to use offshore waters for wind energy. And they make a hell of a lot of money out of that. Can you imagine it? Even better, what about the NHS? Well, they pay 11 million over 15 years, they pay to park their ambulances, because they have to park them in a warehouse for ambulances, for which they're charged. The Ministry of Justice pays William 1.5 million a year for the use, or non-use as it happens because it's been emptied, of Dartmoor Prison. Now, I don't know about you, but this reminds me so much. I'm not going to list all of it. You can read it online, as Steve has pointed out, and I will send the link to the Times article, which you might want to have a look at, but it's behind a paywall, but you do get the opportunity to read one for nothing, so I'd advise you to do that. But the astonishing thing is that this is all sort of accepted. This nanny state, nanny being the monarchy, looks after us, makes us all feel happy. This nanny state is fleecing our public services, is fleecing our taxes just as much as every single one of those Tory leeches like ASOS, G4S, all that lot who run these, because we don't produce anything in this country anymore. So the only way they can make money is by becoming parastatal capitalists. They leech off our state. So everything in the private health service, privatized part of the health service, that is the same sort of relationship to the Crown and us as taxpayers as Charles and all the royal family, or the firm, as Steve rightly calls it. So they are a private business, but they don't pay any tax. Or if they do, I mean, can you imagine if you got to the end of your financial year and you said to the Inland Revenue, oh, you know what, I think I probably owe about 5 and 6. Oh, no, that's old money. 11 shillings. No, that's old money. All right. You know what I mean. Let's say 40 pence. And the Inland Revenue said, well, I think you'll have to produce some paperwork for that. They don't have to bother. They're allowed to estimate their income tax. But I'm going to conclude here by just an example, because I think it's important to underline how little pressure Parliament can really bring on this. You know, you may elect Tony Benn, who was brilliant on the royal family, but he got no further on it either. But let me just give you this marvelous little piece here, and then I'll shut up and leave you guys, everyone, to talk about it. Just to say that Parliament, I'm going to read from the Times article. Parliament tried to scrutinise the two duchies, that's the Lancaster and Cornwall duchies. In 2005, a report by the Public Accounts Committee, chaired by Sir Edward Lee, recommended Charles, the Prince of Wales at the time, be stripped of his power to control the Duchy of Cornwall's affairs. Well, that didn't happen. So it was just a piece of paperwork. But during the hearings, this is what's interesting. During the hearings, Bertie Ross, Keeper of Records for the Duchy of Cornwall, was repeatedly questioned about whether he could provide a complete list of properties owned by the said duchy, so the royal estate could be scrutinised. There's a good word. To determine whether Charles was practicing the principles he preached to the public, i.e. about everybody paying up and looking after the environment, all that stuff. So Bertie was asked, I've used Bertie if you don't mind, we're quite pally. Will you make the information available about the investments in order that judgments can be made by you, me and third parties about what is ethical and sustainable? Because that's another thing, of course, is they invest in a lot of things that are actually not very good for the environment at all. And Ross responds, and this is typical of the mouthpieces. I don't know if any of you watched Sir Humphrey and all that stuff on BBC, but this is actually straight out of that. Yes, Minister. Ross responds, I do not think this is an issue which is relevant to this committee. And that was it.
That's nice.
And until now, the complete list of property holdings for both duchies has never been made public. I rest my case. Okay, I'll shut up now and let the discussion continue. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks very much, Phil and Steve. Yep, it's all secrecy, isn't it, folks? It's all covered up. We are not to know what the royal family has or pays in any shape or form. Tim's had his hand up first. So anybody else who'd like to ask a question or would like to make a contribution, please do raise your electronic hand and I'll bring you in. Tim.
I think the Spanish have a much healthier relationship with their monarchy. I mean, they don't deserve to have a monarchy at all. It was abolished in the 1930s. Franco, of course, brought it back, but I think throwing lumps of mud and stones and things at the king and queen was a very good idea in the circumstances in which they find themselves. Now, we've had all sorts of disasters in the UK from time to time. I don't know, floods and things like that. Of course, the royal family don't normally show up until all the cleaning up has been done. But I just wonder whether anyone would chuck lumps of mud at them there. A few months ago, somebody threw a milkshake at Farage when he was electioneering, and that person got I think a suspended prison sentence just for doing that. So for doing that to one of the royals, I don't know if that would happen. More seriously, I did think that program was very informative. The very fact that the Duchy of Lancaster charges rent to the owners of the wind farms offshore but I mean, millions of pounds per year simply for the right to run their cables across the foreshore, because the Duchy of Lancaster owns every inch of the foreshore all the way down from the Lake District to Liverpool. So I guess actually, if you were ever to go for a swim at Blackpool, you could say you're trespassing on royal land. I don't think they would bother you for that. Well, I believe, well, opinion polls have consistently shown that 30% of the British population would like the monarchy to be replaced by a republic, and certainly everyone on here, I think, would agree with that. Let us simply hope that that we achieve this. And if we're thinking about what kind of presidency we want to have, because we have to have a head of state. I mean, Charles is the head of state, whatever we like to think, because you have to have a named person. It may be meaningless. The Swiss have a very good approach to this. If you are a member of the Swiss government, you're minister of this, that, or the other, you move up the ladder for 7 years until you become prime minister. After 1 year as prime minister, you move up automatically to president of the Swiss Republic, so the Swiss Confederation. And 1 year after that, you return to the back benches. So that is the sort of president that I would like to see. That's enough. I think I'd better let one or two other people have a rant now. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. I didn't know that. That's a really good system they have in Switzerland. Thank you for that. And also, I think it's very interesting that a fascist, Franco, brought back the king. I think that's very telling too.
That was very important for him, because he had his government was actually only made possible by him balancing off the different competing forces, the monarchists, and then the rival claimants to the monarchy, the Catholic Church, the Youth Federation, and all the rest of it. It's quite a complex business. I don't want to go on about that. It would take until midnight, but yeah. But he created that monarchy to have someone to take over from him after he died, because he probably didn't trust any of his ministers to carry on his legacy.
Interesting. I think we possibly need a whole meeting on that. Richard.
Why not? Yeah. Good idea.
Good stuff.
Just to say a couple of little ironic points I missed. I love that. I love it whenever Kate and Will are doing good works in the clubs and going around tapping poor beggars on the head and saying, here's 50 quid for the next couple of years to help you through. One of the interesting things was Will did this marvelous campaign about helping the homeless. But it transpired in the programme, I hope you saw, that the estate in Cornwall, which he draws rents from, was cited as being below the lowest possible level of environmental guidelines necessary for making it habitable. The windows in one house, you could see the curtains blowing with the wind coming through it. So it's ironic that they think they can peddle this idea that they're doing all these good works, when in fact they're not. They're just a bunch of shysters. And the other thing I was going to say was that the role of the monarch is very important. If you look in the Second World War period, the role of monarchs in Eastern Europe, for example, what is now Eastern Europe, in facilitating the rise of fascism in those countries. Mussolini had a good relationship with Vittorio Emanuele in Spain, in Italy. And in fact, Vittorio Emanuele signed off the two things. He signed off, he enabled Mussolini's putsch, And he then also signed off the papers to get the liquidation of the Jewish community rolling, whilst given the present of these huge estates outside Pisa. So kings, I think, are really dangerous. Monarchies are really dangerous to democracy, because if the political conditions seem to indicate or put pressure on it, they can often end up being the facilitators rather than the defenders of the people. They facilitate the rolling in of, say, fascism or extreme right-wing governments. And I think that's one thing about America, which is now split into two parties, autocracy and democracy, roughly speaking. King Trump is exactly what he's trying to become. And in that situation, he would be released from any controls of their what they call guardrails of even the slight democracy America has. So kings are really dangerous. Monarchies are dangerous. They're dangerous to democracy, and they're dangerous to us. It's not just the secrecy, it's not just the money, it's the democratic threat they pose. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Phil. Richard, are you all right to come in now, Richard? Richard Sampson?
Yeah, I think that a number of people have referred to Spain and the role of the monarchy in the recent floods. I think that it's very dangerous to make superficial comparisons. I think that the Spanish monarchy is like a copy of the British monarchy. It's just much more low key. They don't have 19 palaces. They maybe have 2 or 3 or something like that. And they don't, they're not so outrageously rich, and they don't cost so much money. The king and the queen went to Valencia to try to boost morale in the same way, although some people have denied it, that the queen would have turned up in the Blitz, or the king would have turned, or the queen mother would have turned up in the Blitz. That we're going to pull through this together. We're all on the same side. We're part of the same team. But it was obviously very ill judged, and a lot of commentators have said that, because it was manipulated by the regional government in Valencia is controlled by the People's Party, or the Popular Party, and the Spanish government is the Socialists. So there's a lot of bad blood there, and they were seeking who to blame, and the extreme right-wing groups who were jumping on the bandwagon saw it as an opportunity to blame everybody. And so it wasn't, I don't think the king and the queen, it doesn't show that they're massively unpopular more than they were a couple of days ago. It just shows that it was a very ill-judged visit, because they got into a very out of control situation. They expected to be loved, and they met a lot of angry people, and some people who were there as provocateurs, and it was massively out of control. I don't see it so different as the British monarchy when it does the same kind of grandstanding, or when Diana used to go and visit people with AIDS in hospital and all that kind of stuff, or even, as just been mentioned, when the prince and the princess do their sort of charity events. So I would say that. As for, I'm aghast at just a couple of other points. Yeah, I'm aghast at the people who are leading this agenda. People, well, James O'Brien, for example, I wouldn't trust him an inch. He's just what's called insultingly, but I think correctly, a shock jock. I mean, he's quite a pugnacious arguer, but he's absolutely appalling, and I'll never forgive him for all the crap that he'd said about Corbyn, and which he still insists that he was right about that. And then I heard, although I haven't seen it, that Margaret Hodge was one of the people denouncing the unaccountability of the royals. Well, I mean, anything that has got Margaret Hodge denouncing people is completely suspect. As far as I can see, I wouldn't go that way at all. And then I think Phil was talking about secrecy, and Carol said that, this is my last point, Carol said that secrecy was very important. I beg to differ. I think that we just look the other way. I mean, it's like saying that the fact that Trump is immoral and vile and unfit for presidency is a secret. It's not a secret. Everybody knows it, but there must be something compensating or some kind of make-believe in the national psyche that says, well, I mean, you can't say it's a secret when you see the coronation procession and you see the Cinderella coach and all that gold and all that ostentation of extreme wealth going down the street. There's no secrecy about it. It's absolutely in our face. And somehow the general public accepts it. It's just appalling. There seems to be no hope for humanity when people are so gullible and are prepared to accept such vile ostentation in the face of a world where there's still extreme inequality and suffering for so many. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I really agree with you. Yes, yes. It's amazing, isn't it? The deference that people still show. Absolutely amazing. Conchita.
Hello. I just wanted to say about Juan Carlos de Borbón, who was the king's father. He was actually a hostage of Franco and lived all of his, after the Civil War, lived all of his life in the same place as Franco as a hostage to guarantee that his own father wouldn't be in Spain, wouldn't return to Spain. He was exiled. So only when Franco died, after he supposedly felt that he was an acceptable heir after Franco's death, because he'd been trained long enough, and he had a military of officers behind him to keep that Franco's view of what Spain should be like. I must say, when I was in Spain, I was a child, so I wouldn't have been politically savvy, but everybody knew that the king, Juan Carlos de Borbón, the king's father, was a hostage. The current king is married to a woman from Valencia. So I believe she's a lawyer as well. So that goes together well with people who become prime ministers, people who lead ministries. Somehow they've got some professional professions in law or in accountancy related to money. The Duchy of Lancaster, our current chancellor was the head of the Duchy of Lancaster. I think you cannot become a chancellor in this country without getting that training. Had Corbyn been able to succeed in his wonderful ideas, economic ideas, it would have been, is it John McDonnell? He would have been the chancellor. And he would have made a fantastic chancellor, because I went to all the open public conversations that were being had at universities, at banks, at various government buildings. They were really discussing how to change the economy for the many, not the few, which was a very exciting thing about the prospect of a Corbyn government. So they had to kill that. It's the economy that killed Corbyn, because I think it would have been a breath of fresh air for the UK to actually have such open accountability and checks. And you're right, that's what we need in the UK. I don't necessarily think that the Spanish monarchy is less wealthy or less powerful. The Bourbon family is a very old family, connected to the French royal family, connected to Italian wealthy people. Spain ruled over Italy for many, many, many years. So there's that link between the Spanish royal family and European royal families, especially the French and some Italians. That's it. That's what I wanted to mention about, since I lived in Spain, and I understood that side of things from the Spanish point of view. Okay, that's all.
Thanks very much, Conchita. Also very, very interesting. It seems that the people at the top, like the people who benefited from William the Bastard coming across to England and who still own so many pieces of land in the UK, it seems that that doesn't break, that doesn't stop. It carries on down the generations, and that has to be stopped, in my opinion. Phil's raised his hand again.
Yeah, the point in response to Richard's point about all the froth and bubble, the ostentatious sort of wealth, that's all part of the society, the spectacle, as the Situationists called it. It's putting on a good show. It distracts. Now, most people know the last verse of Shelley's Mask of Anarchy. For the many, not the few, in fact, was paraphrased from Shelley's Mask of Anarchy, but they probably haven't read the first half. And the first half is the description of a ghastly masquerade, and it describes the state and why the state has all these baubles and bright coaches and everything, because it hides behind it anarchy, which is the figure of the internal operation of the state, what actually makes it work in the interests of the particular class that rules. Now, of course, he wasn't a Marxist, but given his time, he described it very accurately, I think. If you read from lines 1 to 134 of the Mask of Anarchy, that, I think, is the part that is really relevant to us tonight. And that's what's necessary. You can't sustain a ridiculously out-of-date institution like the British monarchy unless you keep people dazzled. And yes, I think it's important to remember that despite no promotion whatsoever of republicanism in the last, well, since 1647 possibly, it's quite true to say that it's amazing that the percentage of people who want a republic has remained around 29–30%, notwithstanding the fact that there is no real debate about it. You'll never get even, we used to get Tony Blair, Tony Benn, Paul Foot on things like Any Questions. You won't get them anymore. And they would frequently raise these issues. But as far as the Spanish monarchy goes, I think it's interesting that Philippe, I think his name was, the previous king, got done for fraud. And I don't think you'll ever find the British state taking on the royalty, even if they discovered any fraud, which is why they probably think it's best to keep it secret. And, you know, this is really why the secrecy matters, because the less people know, the better. And the only way this ridiculous system can continue is if it's as closed off as possible. So have a look at Mask of Anarchy. That's a great study of a description of why we have all the coaches and horses and all that stuff. It's all part of dazzling you. And in fact, if you read the Diggers' song, 1649, they dazzle us with heaven and they damn us all to hell. That's the purpose of what you were describing, Rich, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I love that. Dazzle us with heaven. And what was the word? Dazzle us
Damn us all to hell.
Damn us all to hell. I love that. Yeah.
They dazzle us with heaven and they damn us all to hell. Yes. Marvelous. 1640, Diggers' song, 1649.
Diggers' song. Fantastic.
Diggers' song, the Diggers' song.
Thank you, Phil, for that.
Pleasure.
We need to go back to Steve then, and then to Phil to give their concluding remarks. So, Steve, over to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to, I think, I'm just looking back. I wasn't really intended. I mean, I think somehow my reference to the Spanish monarchy kind of took us off onto a particular thing, and it was like a throwaway one line, and everybody then followed up on the one line. So I wasn't really expecting that. I wasn't doing an analysis of the history or nature of the Spanish monarchy. I was saying that what I really wanted to say was the history of the monarchy and republicanism in Spain means that the people in Spain look at their monarchy in a very different way, and the points that Conchita made and Richard, I think, are kind of part of that. But I think I disagree with Richard, that Richard seemed to be saying, well, we already know everything there is to know and we don't care. We're not bothered. because when we see their parades and all the rest of it, all the things that Phil talked about, the fact is that we don't know so much stuff about the monarchy. The fact that it is secret means that most of people are not totally aware. I mean, that is a revelation, what we found out just the other day, and it is not known. And Phil, I think, made the point that Parliament failed actually to get this information. Parliament failed, the select committees failed to get this information and make it public. And it's secret for a particular reason. The monarchy isn't secret. Yeah, we can see them parading around, as Richard said, in the streets. It's not that the monarchy is a secret. We didn't know it was there. We know the monarchy exists. We know all the propaganda about it, but we don't know the real nature of that monarchy. We're surprised to find out that it is a capitalist monarchy, that it exists not just for show, it also exists to make profit. And it's doing a pretty good job of making profit out of the property that it owns. And we don't know that. We think it's just sitting in castles and turning up and going on show. But it's not. It's a business. The monarchy is a business that doesn't pay taxes, doesn't pay its proper share of taxes. And it's not and its activities are not subject to proper scrutiny, given that we are financing it. We say the general public accept it. Well, I think Phil's made this point before. 30% of people don't accept the monarchy. But the real thing is that that 30% hasn't been turned into anything political. But nobody's tried to say, well, let's organise a party that would actually campaign to get rid of the monarchy and establish a republic. That is something that hasn't happened. The Corbyn movement never did that. And this goes back to, I think, to Conchita's point, really. The problem for John MacDonald is if he had become Chancellor of the Exchequer, he would have become the prisoner of His Majesty's Treasurer, and they would have shaped what he was going to do. So I think that the problem is not the economic ideas, but it's the political power. Who holds the political power, and how does that political power operate? And I think in a popular cultural way, Yes Minister tell us how it really works in many ways. If you've seen that comedy program, it really shows how the Crown actually operates to ensure that nothing really changes all that much. So I think that's possibly maybe all I want to say is that it is, I think, I'll maybe finish on this point. There is a crisis of democracy in England. And that crisis of democracy, because we have a constitutional monarchy, that crisis of democracy must draw the monarchy into public discussion about what it's for, what its role is, and how it's going to function, and how do we function in relation to it. And I see this little scandal that we've had coming to light is part of the crisis of the British monarchy after the Queen has gone. After we've seen Harry and Meghan, we've seen the Duke of York and his scandals, and now we're seeing this. It's all part, I think, of a questioning of what role, what kind of constitution, what kind of monarchy we've got. So I just think we will see. It's part of, I think, something that is going to get worse before it gets better. I'll finish there.
Yes, I think the real point is, how can we get the message through to people? How can we get rid of this ridiculous deference to this family who are perpetrating all kinds of frauds upon us, the people? How do we get that message across? That's the real point. Phil, I'm going to ask you to come in and give your...
Okay, I'll be as brief as I can. Couple of things. Republics aren't presidential republics. Democratic republics are not presidential republics. It's not merely just changing the head of state and saying you've got a republic. That's not what we're about. If you analyze America, it was started by a class of slave owners who founded it with the express intention of maintaining slavery. In fact, it was the guy who wrote the Age of Reason. Tom Paine, sorry, who you should all visit the Red Lion pub in Islington, because he wrote the second part of that in there, and I raised a glass to him 2 weeks ago. I just saw it, I didn't know about it. Anyway, Tom Paine told them very prophetically, he told Jefferson, all of them, he said, if you don't get rid of slavery, you're going to end up in trouble, because this is a state of iniquity that cannot endure without conflict. And he was right. They didn't do it, and they paid the price with the Civil War. So not a presidential republic, that's not what we're after. But you look at our country in relation to the rest of Europe, and even though France is almost a king, if you look at how Macron behaves and everything, and the Prime Minister, they have almost untrammeled power. So even France, they have a notional idea of being citizens, of being part of a democracy, however notional and ridiculous it is. It's not a democracy, really. It's a huge mess, and it needs another revolution probably. But that's the kind of thing I notice, how backward we are in Europe. And everyone who wants to go back into Europe, well, I think what we could start by doing is modernizing our own state before we start trying to move into Europe. And I think there are a lot of things which we could do. I think this 30% is a very important element. We need to start to talk about the 30% of people and to explain that being anti-monarchist is a good starting point, but it's never going to be enough. And the last thing I'll say is, why is this program so important? It's lifted the lid on an institution that ran the slave trade in the late 17th century, that set up the royal finances of the Royal Africa Company and made money out of human misery. And although it stopped doing that formally in the mid-18th century, much of its financial viability was based, like much of the ruling class of this country, was based on the appropriation of other people's lives and the exporting of human beings, 10 million of them, across the Atlantic. And they are fighting tooth and nail now. And notice how Starmer, that great standard bearer for human rights, I'll not hear a word said against him. He's the greatest champion of human rights that has ever been Prime Minister of this country. And he's a hypocrite. He chaunts his human rights lawyer record, and yet he said, like a colonial administrator in India in the 18th century, we will not discuss reparations. Well, I think they're going to have trouble now, because a lot of people around the world are going to read about this. They're going to say, well, hang on a minute. You say you can't afford reparations. Okay, we don't expect the royal family to pay it all, but you can't complain about not having made money out of it, and you can't complain that you haven't got money to pay something towards it. And if you don't pay something towards it, to at least recognize, not with some feeble apology like they made, or non-apology like they made in Kenya last year, or in the Caribbean with William in his Land Rover dressed in white garb. Fantastic image of neocolonialism. But you can do something about reparations. And I think it's opened a can of worms, this thing on Channel 4. And I think now is the time we need to push for a republic, but a real Republican movement, demand that left people start to consider it, and demand that we really push and help push the question of reparations for the slave trade. Because I think they've got a very, very difficult time now saying, oh, I don't think we can afford it. I'll leave it there.
I'd like to make, if I could, Carol, just one more point, if I could.
Yep, absolutely.
Just a small point. When I'm saying that 30% of the population is vaguely in some areas is in favour of a republic, that's a large number of people. And I would point a finger at the socialist movement, because the socialist movement has done more or less nothing to try to turn that opinion into an active politics, an active programme, an active party. The left, either in the Corbyn movement, and that's ironic really, because Tony Benn did raise this question, did take it seriously. Jeremy Corbyn was a follower of Tony Benn, but when he got his chance, he didn't take forward Tony Benn's program. He didn't make anything out of it. He dumped it and said, well, I can become prime minister and use the powers of the crown to introduce some form of socialization from above. And it was something that failed. And most of the far left is no more interested in republicanism than Jeremy Corbyn is. So our whole socialist movement says, well, of course, under socialism, there won't be a monarchy. So if that's the case, why bother doing anything about it right now? So I think that for different reasons, the socialist movement has failed to mobilize and build a Republican Party with something that we don't have, something that would take that anti-monarchist sentiment and turn it into something positively democratic and Republican. So that's I think the problem we got is massive, really.
Absolutely, Steve.
And I just say, one other thing. I did see a comment from Ray, which I agreed with in the chat, saying that, of course, we're incorporated into the crown. When you become an MP, you go into Parliament, you swear your oath of allegiance to the crown in Parliament. And at that point, you are, you're compromised, really.
Absolutely.
And if Corbyn had ever become the prime minister, that compromise would have been even more than the one he made when he joined the Privy Council and swore his oath of allegiance to the Queen, which is what he did in 2017.
And you saw the way that the establishment reacted when Clive Lewis tried not to take the oath of allegiance. That caused a real kerfuffle, didn't it? So that just showed you, although they're trying to say, oh, it doesn't mean anything, it's, just do it, it's not important. It is important. And that's why they wanted him to go back and say it, and they forced him to go back and say that oath again. That shows how important it is to them. And that.
Well, just to add to that, Carol, Tony Benn in his book says that we don't understand our constitution and that the oaths that you swear to the crown are absolutely central, because these oaths are legally binding oaths. Like swearing, like you go into court and you swear on the Bible to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's not a joke when you do that. It's like a serious thing that you're doing. And our constitution, says Tony Benn, works exactly like that. You swear to get into Parliament, an oath of allegiance. You swear if you become a member of the armed forces. You swear if you become a minister, you join the Privy Council. You make these oaths. And Tony Benn says that is the shall we say, the skeleton of our constitution, these oaths. They're not to be just treated like a joke. They are really quite serious legal things that you're doing. Tony Benn knew that because he had to do all that anyway as a minister. So he knew it from the inside. That's why his case was very powerful.
Absolutely. And I see Richard has put an interesting point in the chat. The Fabians believed that once Labour was in power, privilege would just fall away through education. Interesting point, Richard. The Fabians are always waiting for everything to happen slowly, catch a monkey, aren't they? That's a good point, Richard. Right, I don't see any further hands up, so it's left to me to thank Steve and Phil very much indeed, and for us to all go away and think about spreading the word that we actually need a republic, and we need rid of the crown, we need rid of the monarchy, and we need true democracy in this country, and think about how we can spread that message to our networks, our various networks. So thank you all very much indeed for attending tonight. Thank you for the contributions and the questions, and especially thank you to Steve and Phil.
And sorry, can I quickly say, and please do come to the programme of events we are putting on, because they're all elements of the discussion on republicanism. So I'm sure if you're signed up, you'll be getting the emails, but do please come, because the more of us that come to those things and talk about stuff, the better we understand it, all of us, the better it will be, because we can spread the message more authoritatively than we could if we're just saying, I want to be a Republican, which is great. It's a good starting point. But,
absolutely, totally agree with you. So at that point, I'm saying goodbye to everybody. Thank you for attending, and enjoy the rest of your evening.